everybody. Thanks for coming to the very first talk of Food Week. It's really exciting. We have 9 days of lots of speakers every day. And our very first speaker today is Dr. Harper. Dr. Harper is a social scientist, a writer, a researcher, a consultant. She's the founder and author of a really popular blog called Sistah, a critical race feminist approach to veganism. Besides blog posts delve into how plant-based consumptive lifestyles are affected by factors of race, racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, and other social injustices within the lives of Black women. The Sistah Vegan project reflects the fact that for people of color, the personal is often political and nothing is a single issue. She received her BA from Dartmouth College, her master's from Harper University, and her PhD from the University of California, Davis. She's the editor of Sistah Vegan, Food, Identity, Health, and Society, Black Female Vegans Speak, and the author of a social fiction novel titled Scars, about which she's going to be talking a little more today. And she's currently working on her 3rd book, which focuses on the intersection of ethical consumption, alternative Black masculinity, and hip-hop. We're really, really excited to have her, Dr. Harper.
From Oakland, so it was like 70 minutes. It was great. It was a great flight because whenever I land alive, it's a great flight. So thank you for having me here. And I wanted to actually start off with a music video. It's not really a video, but it's music with images to a piece by Lauren Hill. And it's actually called Black Rage, Ferguson Dedication. It's just to kind of give you context to the times, but using music, and that's what I do. I often sing and use music to get some of my points across, and I usually showcase it first and then return to what's going on. Here it is.
As a person, rapings and beatings, suffering work. I raised family on 2/3 a person. Rapings and beatings, suffering worsens. Black human packages, tied up in strings. Black rage can come from all these kinds of things. Black rage is passed on, blatant denial. Squeeze economics, subsistence survival. Definite silence and social control. Black rage is found in all wounds in the soul. When the dog's back, when the beat rings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember all these kinds of things, and then I feel so bad. Black race founded, set up self-hatred, lies and abuse, while we're waiting, spiritual truths in this grid and pages. Black rage is founded on these kinds of things. Black rage is founded on trading and trading, your freedom,
give you context, so these are interesting times for everyone, more than others, and what happened with Trayvon Martin, especially Ferguson last year, it was really difficult for me. As a black woman, with a twin black brother, a black son, it was really difficult for me. And it just wasn't an option for it to be something extracurricular, it became center. At the same time, I am a critical food studies scholar, and I am interested in how racism and whiteness operate at the systemic level. So I've been thinking about this concept of black rage. I've been thinking about this concept of why a lot of white people that I meet really don't understand the context of Ferguson, that it's not an anomaly, but it's a continuum of a struggle that's been happening since 500 years ago. It's just changed form, but it's still, the underlying issue is that there has been and continues to be a racial caste system, racism, whiteness. So I asked myself, how can I actually figure out how to explore these as a critical food scholar? It's the context, and I love music. So let me just bring it back using Keynote, which is the superior version of presentation software. I'm saying superior, I'm just joking because I don't know how to use it, but let me see. So I'm going to, this works. Okay, great. So this is called Food, Wellness, and the Scars of Racism and Whiteness. And basically, I have several questions in my research and writing. First of all, I'm interested in how objects get the meanings that they have, and more importantly, as a food studies scholar, how certain food objects can tell us about racial power dynamics in this country. So I did my work really focusing on racism and whiteness, but more specifically understanding white supremacy not at the overt level like Nazis or KKK, but something more subtle, a different demographic called white neoliberal folk. Folk who sincerely believe, I'm not racist, because I'm not a Nazi, I don't lynch black people, and have this critical literacy around racism that's actually from 60 years ago, not now. So they understand what racism is, but it's kind of like racism is antebellum slavery. Racism is Jim Crow. They don't understand that it's changed form. They don't understand that even though colonialism has ended, still things have been organized in a way that white or light-skinned people in the North and Western hemispheres benefit the most. And you can see that in the way power and resources, and I look at food, the commodity chain, how that is organized and who gets what, who's the consumer and who's the producer, who's exploited and who's not. And then even more interesting, I'm like, okay, so what does this look like in ethical consumption? Because like it's supposed to be ethical, it's supposed to be cruelty-free. And I'm focusing on veganism because that's supposed to be cruelty-free. And my dissertation work looked at vegan food objects. I looked at PETA. People are not familiar with PETA. They are people for the ethical treatment of animals. And they have a vegan shopping guide that really looked at cruelty-free products. And when I looked at that, I realized that, yeah, an animal wasn't harmed, but like the cocoa came from child slavery. And like the sugar came from, Haitian slaves. So what's going on here? Why is it that people are being taught that this is cruelty-free? And even more when I go on the blogs and the books and I do searches for food justice and racism embedded in the food system, why does that not come up in PETA? And PETA's like, they're very profound. So, they do a lot of good work, yes, but I tried to develop a language around this. What does this mean? And I came up with this concept called neoliberal whiteness. So it's functioning in a system where there's this belief that all forms of racism have ended, colonialism has ended, and we don't have to really think about racism as a significant impediment to equality and justice. But what's actually happening here is that they're teaching people that you can consume with your dollars and make change. So that's a privilege. A privilege is to actually be able to buy something, to have money to make change. So PETA comes with all these assumptions with the objects, the food objects that they have labeled as cruelty-free. And the assumption is that the consumer is white, middle class, able-bodied, straight person, that they have that relationship to food. And that comes across when we're even talking about vegan objects, okay? So that's my background, that's what I've been doing. And I've been trying to understand for the past 12 years why there's so much disconnect between what PETA spouts and what they, and how white collectivity respond to it versus people of color, why so many people of color say that peanut is so quote-unquote white, and what that means. So that's my background. And I always let people know, like, I'm looking at systemic whiteness. I'm not talking about individual white people. I'm literally looking at systemic, how things operate, systemically, structurally, institutionally. So that's my background. And what I'm coming with today is how I explore that through narrative writing, through my new novel, Scars. So it's called Scars, a Black Lesbian Experience in Rural White New England. And I don't think I'm going to actually use this for much of the talk because I don't know why, but I can't actually see my talk. The PowerPoint is up and it's up there. So I'm actually going to get out of it and read from my talk and then go back when I need visuals, if that's okay. Okay? Let us begin. So let's talk about food studies. In the Western society, academia, the first food studies scholars were anthropologists who looked at exotic foods of non-white cultures in order to explain the cultural patterns of primitive peoples. Cultural food studies as a formal field of study was not established until the 1960s. Much of the analysis within cultural food studies is undergirded by the notion that tastes are not objective, but rather are social constructions which are culturally formed. Food reflects power structures and social formations. Influential theorists in this canon were Mary Douglas, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Pierre Bourdieu, and Roland Barthes. In her highly acclaimed Purity and Danger, Douglas analyzes the taboos around food that can be found in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. She concluded that proper food protocols were a method for tribal societies to maintain their separate identity, and this pattern still exists today. Lévi-Strauss explained that when one prepares food, they are in fact communicating a cultural identity, which is repeated and solidified through repetition of culinary traditions. In the 1960s, he argued that food preparation was a form of socialization for society, and that the preparer of food works as a cultural translator of cultural standards. Such cultural standards are significantly influenced by middle to upper class value systems and the meanings they give to culinary items. The underlying theme that appears to connect this food studies scholarship is a significant role that proper food philosophies play in the creation of not just purity, but how one expresses their sense of ethics. Whether it is raw cooked food, food prepared under the law of Islam, or cuisine that adheres to rules from biblical scripture, these all represent how people desire to literally consume to create ethical bodies, which in turn create ethical minds and actions. And those are all in quotes because ethical itself is not objective, it's very subjective. Such ethical inscriptions applied to food can be analyzed through food semiology. Semiology is the study of signs and seeks to understand how signs communicate the value system of a culture. For example, how are vegan food objects symbolized to create myths about innate purity, cruelty-free and ethical? How are the signs of food ethics perceived, and how can such interrogations reveal how phenomena such as racism, neoliberalism, and globalized capitalism are normalized or rejected? Barth's scholarship on semiology has been used extensively in food studies, as well as critical whiteness studies, to analyze how modern objects convey a situation, how they reflect a system of communication, and most importantly, how the meanings inscribed on these objects literally shape the collective consciousness of modern Western society. The social places that certain foods have in society are also a display of a particular type of attitude. For example, in my fiction and nonfiction writing, I've explored differing attitudes that people have towards sugar, cocoa, PETA-approved vegan food objects, animal food products, fast food objects such as McDonald's and Coca-Cola. For example, food justice groups such as Food Empowerment Project signify chocolate sweets with slavery and exploitation, while groups like PETA find big corporate vegan cocoa products as cruelty-free, simply because a non-human animal wasn't harmed, regardless if it came from an enslaved child. Though Barthes is known for his work on semiotics of objects, this scholarship not only focuses on the object of food, but also on the objects of post-empire whiteness. In the mid-20th century, Barthes analyzed the effects of post-empire whiteness on the collective consciousness of white people living in the global north. His observations lead him to believe that despite colonialism having been formally abolished, most white people will continue to function in the world through the logic and grammar of post-empire whiteness, which could be revealed through analysis of their relationship with and to everyday objects. And I'm looking at everyday food objects. I renew and extend this research by showing how PETA and organizations like that inscribe cruelty-free meanings onto vegan food objects while obscuring the role that neoliberal whiteness plays to make these commodities possible. So in this context, neoliberal whiteness is a form of post-empire whiteness. So Barth's work has also inspired me to not only look at post-empire objects of neoliberal whiteness, but also analyze how the same vegan food objects take on contrasting and similar meanings that they did. So although the purpose of Barthesian racial analysis is to solely reveal how white collusion with whiteness can be revealed through the relationship to everyday objects, I will complicate Barth's conclusions. By applying this framework not only to neoliberal food objects, I open up new possibilities to think about how collusion with neoliberal whiteness is not necessarily limited to predominantly white liberals engaged in ethical foodways such as PETA. And I like to kind of explore how even the descendants of the colonized can unconsciously uphold particular values of whiteness when advocating for liberation from it. So for example, there are a lot of black folk who in America are deeply frustrated by racism, systems of racism. At the same time, a lot of us are buying foods that are made possible because of exploitation of, say, black laborers in Africa. So it's just interesting how that becomes really complicated and how one does not necessarily understand what to do with that knowledge. And I explore those themes in my novel, which I'll read excerpts from. So overall, there has been minimal scholarship to date that takes a critical race approach to ethical consumption, vegan guides of commodities culture in the neoliberal era. Such scholarship can offer a critical literacy of racial neoliberalism for those who desire to make fundamental changes to the food system, from the local to the global level. More specifically, such scholarship for a global North and West audience provides an intervention into the taken-for-granted notion that racial neoliberalism is progress. This intervention is my contribution to both critical studies of race and critical food studies. In the next section, I'm going to talk about my analysis of food objects such as sugar and cocoa and how they're seen in my book, Scars, and how this is not really about like animal rights or even veganism. What my analysis is going to suggest is that mainstream framing of what is civilized and cruelty-free is linked to a larger American cultural phenomenon. Beneficiaries of neoliberal capitalist economy do not really want to know where and how commodities get to them. The process of estrangement erases the genealogy of how these objects arrived there and how they took on the harmless meaning that they have, i.e. cruelty-free. Hence, estrangement teaches the holder of such objects that what they have in their hands is pure and innocent, and that they have no responsibility to investigate any further how it got there in the first place. And such ideologies fool the subscriber of neoliberal whiteness into thinking they have an active consciousness, when in fact this estrangement encourages passivity in consciousness. And this is exacerbated by the neoliberal politics of a post-racial USA. So what I wanted to do is read from my book Scars and take out parts of it. So the book is called Scars, A Black Lesbian Experience in Rural White New England. It's very intersectional. And the book can be used for many different reasons. It's a social fiction novel. It's part of a new series in Sense Publishers collections. And they're looking at how you can apply critical theories, timely issues, merged with critical theories into social fiction novel form. So this book does that. That's what I was asked to address. So, what is Scars? Scars is a novel about whiteness, racism, and breaking past the normative boundaries of heterosexuality as experienced through 18-year-old Savannah Penelope Sales. Savannah is a black girl born and raised in white, working class, and rural New England town. She is in denial of her lesbian sexuality, harbors internalized racism about her body, and is ashamed of being poor. She lives with her ailing mother, whose emphysema is a symptom of a mysterious past of suffering and sacrifice that Savannah is not privy to. When Savannah takes her first trip to a major metropolitan city for 2 days, she never imagines how it will affect her return back home and to her mother, or her capacity to not only love herself, but also those who she thought were her enemies. Scars is about the journey of friends and family who love Savannah and try to help her heal, all while they too battle their own wounds and scars of being a big part of multiple systems of oppression and power. Ultimately, scars makes visible the psychological trauma and scarring the legacies of colonialism have caused to both the descendants of the colonized and the colonizer, and the potential for healing and reconciliation for everyone willing to embark on the journey. So as a work of social fiction born out of years of critical race, Black feminist, and critical whiteness studies scholarship, Scars engages the reader to think about USA culture through the lenses of race, whiteness, working class sensibilities, sexual orientation, and how rural geography influences Black identity, development, and consciousness. Now, what makes this novel unique is its emphasis on Black and lesbian teen experiences of whiteness and racism within rural geographies, and how food objects, at first it looks like they're the backdrop, but they actually become integral to really understanding racial power dynamics, and what one thinks is civilized, what thinks one is cruelty-free, and what even one thinks about what is anti-racist. So, there are several characters that you need to know about. Davis Allen is one of Savannah's best friends, a straight white man who grew up on a rural dairy farm in Savannah's hometown. Davis and Savannah have been close friends ever since they were toddlers. Davis is the only white friend Savannah has ever chosen to develop a close relationship with. When Davis and Savannah interact with each other, the intimacies of their conversations reveal an interesting dynamic. Davis's perception of reality manifests from what Savannah has marked as a privileged point of entry: white, male, lower middle class, and straight. Davis can never experience Savannah's embodied experience as a Black lesbian. Growing up in a country that has institutionally legitimized whiteness and heterosexuality as normal, Davis's white and straight identity limits him to superficially interpreting Savannah's verbal hostility as nothing more than angry Black female banter. The second theme developed in Scars is the irreconcilable differences that Eric Roberts and Savannah endure in their rocky new platonic relationship. Eric and Savannah both identify as same-gender loving, however, that is where similarities between them end. Their frequent antagonistic verbal intercourses deconstruct the common myth that being gay or lesbian means they will instantly connect emotionally to each other as comrades in the same battle against heterosexism. The exhaustive energy it takes for both to maintain their volatile relationship has its roots in Eric's oblivion to the fusion of his upper middle class status and his white male privilege when attempting to advise Savannah about being and coming out as a Black, poor, and rural lesbian. The third and more subtle theme developed in Scars centers on how Savannah's perception of oppression is positioned within a geopolitically global northern perspective. Savannah never acknowledges her privilege as a USA national, only her lack of privileges as a non-white person. She considers herself revolutionary in thought in comparison to the people living in the provincial town she grew up in. Simultaneously, she has no awareness of the perpetuation of inequality outside of the USA. For example, Savannah is unaware of how many people of color outside of the USA are exploited so she can buy cheap coffee, chocolate, and Coca-Cola. Esperanza Perez, a key character, is one of her best friends. Esperanza, a vegan and fair trade anti-globalization activist who originally grew up in Guatemala, visits Savannah from college. Through honest and heartfelt dialogues with Esperanza, Savannah's oblivious understanding of her geopolitical northern privilege is revealed. I hope to engage the reader to empathize with Savannah's realistic struggles with whiteness as the invisible norm in the USA, while also addressing the need for Savannah to engage deeper into social injustice by encompassing and linking Black struggles and USA racism to a broader range of social and ecological inequalities throughout the world, including the suffering and pain that go into the food commodities such as cocoa and the chicken milk that comes to Savannah's plate. Born out of my Dartmouth College thesis social research in feminist geography and Harvard master's work, and Scars, in my University of California work, Scars emphasizes how rural geographies of whiteness can impact the consciousness and young identity development of non-white youth who seemingly don't belong in rural settings of whiteness and heteronormativity. Yet, the reader sees during Savannah's trip to her first major metropolitan city, she is very much out of place. Furthermore, Savannah contrasts the mainstream media stereotype that the authentic Black experience is from heterosexual Blacks raised in predominantly urban landscapes. Even though the critical theory in this novel has been translated into creative writing form, it's notable that Scars was significantly influenced by a strong canon of Black critical thinkers and writers, stemming from all the way back to W.E.B. Du Bois, and Franz Fanon. So I just want to give you all that because you're not going to be able to sit and like read this book in an hour, so I try to condense it. So when I start reading the excerpts, you know where I'm coming from. Okay. Okay, so I gave you all that, and sorry if it was like way too much, but you can always read the book when you get access to it. So I want to talk about how food objects are organized in this book. And I'm going to read from this book and really talk about what they mean. Okay, so here's a scene. I don't want to give away too much of it in case you do want to read it. But there's a scene where Savannah is sitting in Eric's dining room with several of her friends. And they've prepared lunch. And to remind you, Savannah is from a working class background. She eats animals. Eric is vegan, and he's upper middle class, went to Harper. And she sees all these objects, and there's just conversation about what's going on. And her friends Esperanza and Davis are also there. Sitting at Eric's kitchen table, I stare at my Belgian waffle, wondering where my dress is, wondering whether I puked on it, wondering if, after talking to Mama on the phone, she really doesn't need me back anytime soon. Enjoy your free time, baby. Don't you worry about me, she had told me. Enjoy my free time? I have begun to suspect that I do not know how to enjoy free time. Had Eric been right? Do I really like being miserable? Oh, what does he know? Nothing, because he's never ever been poor. Why would anyone enjoy being miserable? Savannah, you've been staring at that waffle for the last 5 minutes, Davis says to me. Without looking up, I shrug and reply. Lifting up my fork, I poke at it several times, sniff, and then put my fork back down. I don't enjoy being miserable. I slouch down into the brushed stainless steel dining chair. Who buys stainless steel chairs for a dining table anyway? My toes grace the warm, hard wood flooring of the dining room. On the left of me is the entrance to Eric's kitchen. Ceiling track lights brightly illuminate a newly renovated kitchen that is filled with high-end culinary purchases, like a Vitamin Splendor and Le Creuset cookware and bakeware. On the side of his enormous stainless steel refrigerator is a bookcase filled with vegetarian and vegan cookbooks. On top of the bookcase are photos of some way too happy and smiling blonde chick, probably his little sister, hanging on the ivory painted wall. I don't enjoy being miserable, jerk, I mumble, spontaneously grabbing one of my 2 knives on the side of my plate and then stab my waffle. All around my plate are too many utensils with various functions that I could care less about. They're all supposed to be for my brunch. Why do I need 2 different spoons anyway? What's the point of a small and a big fork? A red cloth napkin? Why? Are you drunk still? Eric asks me. Taking the knife out of the waffle, I look up and point it at him. I do not enjoy being miserable. What's she talking about? Esperanza asks. Who said anything about that? Eric asks. What did she say? Davis signs to Eric, and Davis is hearing impaired, so he signs. She doesn't enjoy being miserable, he signs back. Well, I don't enjoy being miserable, I sign and say. Who said you did? Davis replies. The reject sitting over there, I say, pointing to Eric. Hey, this reject let you sleep in his bed while he slept on the floor. Then she says, I mean, you hardly even know me. How can you make such an accusation? Taking a sip from his orange juice, Eric replies, it wasn't an accusation, I was merely speculating. You were beginning to get on my nerves. Sorry if I hurt your feelings, but it was just something I had to say. And she says, you didn't hurt my feelings, you just made me mad. My cheeks quiver a bit, but then I quickly command myself not to cry. I rub my cheeks furiously. Eric says, I always make you mad, Savannah. I thought you knew that by now, he says with a smirk. Now put the butter knife down before you hurt yourself. Can I have your waffle if you're not going to eat it? Davis asked me. There's plenty of vegan ones left if you want one, or Esperanza says, pointing to a plate of waffles with interesting texture and consistency. She intentionally emphasizes vegan and pretend not to notice. How about I leave those all for you guys? Davis asks, not taking his eyes away from my waffle. Shrugging, I answer, go for it. He beams with joy and pierces my waffle with his matte silver fork. We should play in the snow after, Eric signs and says. That sounds like fun, Davis says. Can't you eat with your mouth closed without talking like a pig? I sign and say to Davis. Esperanza shakes her head and then shakes her right index finger at me. You know, it's not nice to insult a human being by calling them a pig. And pigs go through so much suffering just so you can eat your breakfast bacon sandwich from McDonald's and then die from a heart attack. And then she interrupts her best friend. Oh, you're not now, Esperanza. Seriously, I just can't listen to that right now, I feel. Esperanza shakes her head and then whispers to herself, barely loud enough for me to hear. If not now, then when? She gives a glance to Eric, gesturing with her raised eyebrows that she's looking for his support. He returns her glance with raised eyebrows as well, and then shrugs his shoulders. Yeah, probably not the best time, but I know what you mean. You know, this is Savannah talks. You know, just because you have a million annoying vegetarian and vegan cookbooks in your kitchen and wear that stupid peanut button all the time doesn't make you some perfectly enlightened human being. A gazillion vegetarian books, but I bet you don't own even one book about racism or white privilege, I say to Eric, as well as sign to Davis. My head begins to throb again. Ugh, why are we even having this stupid conversation about pigs? I don't really care to get into it. Anyway, Savannah's just being Savannah, Davis says and signs nonchalantly. Whatever, another time then. Esperanza crumples her eyebrows at me with disappointment. Well, what does she expect? I'm hungover and cranky, and she knows not to talk smack about my McDonald's. So that's the excerpt. So there's a lot going on there, at least I think there is. And to give you background, so Eric is a white upper-class guy who went to Harper who's gay, and he's marked himself with pita buttons whenever they go to class, in my college classroom. He's taking a community college course, part of his new job to be a chief financial officer. And so we've got pita buttons everywhere, and he's got vegan cookbooks everywhere, and he and Savannah at one point go to McDonald's, and he's like, I can't believe you eat like that, I can't believe you eat that. So there's like a lot going on where Eric thinks he's the good white. You know, I'm a liberal white, I can't believe you accuse me of racism, I'm so civilized, look what I do. You know, I shop at Whole Foods. So I talk about Whole Foods, and like Whole Foods, the marker of civility. You know, I don't eat animals, I'm vegan. So like those vegan cookbooks, that marker of a certain type of neoliberal white civility. Like, I'm civilized. And I can't believe you eat at McDonald's. You eat like that? Like that, like what? So what are you marking me as? The lower class eating? That I eat that way, I'm not eating like you. So there's these tensions already happening because he doesn't understand how his whiteness is operating, even though he's trying to help her because she's in the closet, he's gay, he's been out for like 12 years. He's really trying to help, but he doesn't get it. And then she's looking at all these objects that kind of remind her of these like class and racial differences between the two of them. And then there's Esperanza, who she's looking at what they're both doing. So, you know, Eric is this white guy, but he's vegan, and she's vegan too. But then her best friend who gets racism, but her best friend's eating chickens. And her best friend also is buying things like Hershey cocoa bars and Coca-Cola products. And Esperanza, who's now at the University of Toronto, she's come from a background where her father had been murdered, and they sought asylum in America because her father had been murdered trying to enrage cocoa and coffee plantation workers in Latin America. So she gets it. But she's trying to understand what's going on as this like new American citizen who's now moved to Canada and looking at what her friends are doing. So I'm looking at these objects, and there's a lot going on with like notions of food and wellness and health. So we've got Eric, who's like, you know, I'm well civilized, and then there's Savannah, who's poor. Her mother's dying from, you know, emphysema-related complications, and she has this memory where she's thinking about how this woman in her school told her mother, you know, your daughter's lactose intolerant. So maybe you can mix in soy powder and some carrot and she won't know the difference. So I started thinking about how like objects of milk, you know, dairy, how that's very much the mainstream, and how if you are a person of Asian or African descent, most likely you cannot digest it, and what that means. Living in a white settler nation, so these objects where that's the norm, but she can't do the norm, so her mom has to do these other things. And then her mom decided to get her to actually drink the soy milk that she didn't like. She replaced it with Hershey's cocoa and Domino sugar. So those are also markers of empire. So Hershey sources their cocoa from enslaved labor, from black enslaved children in Africa, in West Africa. And Domino sugar is part of, sugar comes from enslaved laborers, Haitians lived in enslaved laborers. A lot of them are indentured or enslaved. So like those are markers of empire still. So we're supposed to be in this post-colonial, post-empire world. Yet these commodities mark that we're not. And in Savannah she has horrible cavities. She's in so much pain. And there's a scene where she drinks coffee that's not fair trade, that's loaded with all this Domino's sugar, and it hits the filling, and she's just like in so much pain. So these products of colonialism are now, coming to her through neocolonialism. They're degrading her body. So these objects are also important to look at because Eric is not doing those objects. He's more civilized. He's living life more healthy because he's a vegan. He eats from Whole Foods. He would never touch that McDonald's stuff. But then there isn't the story. Eric does not understand how it got to be that way. Eric comes from this point where he thinks, shouldn't everyone eat that way? Why aren't you eating that way? And he's not understanding, as Savannah goes through terrible pain about racism, being in the closet about being lesbian, how she reaches for particular food objects that are not necessarily healthy enough for her psychic health. But she's also working class poverty, and she only has access to these commercial grade foods that don't necessarily help her with her physical health and her emotional well-being. So that's how I'm kind of reading the objects and placing them in the book. And then there's a scene when Esperanza visits Savannah, who's working at the local gas station / convenience store. And she enters the store, and Savannah is thinking about how she's going to apply to the new Coca-Cola scholarship because she needs money for community college. And Savannah makes this comment like, didn't you read that pamphlet I sent you about Coca-Cola and human rights and all that stuff? And Savannah's caught because she's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I have no money, my mom's dying, but I have to rely on Coca-Cola, which is creating suffering for all of us anyway, to give me money. So it's like that notion, can the master's tools really dismantle the master's house? And her friends just trying to get her to kind of break past this, and it's uncomfortable for her. So what's interesting is that when when Esperanza critiques Savannah about her food objects, it's different than the way Eric is critiquing it. So Savannah is being critiqued by Eric in this neoliberal whiteness way. Why aren't you doing it our way so you can be civilized and ethical, and why aren't you post-racial, and what's all this race talk? What does vegan food objects have to do with race? What does anything have to do with race? What does sexuality have to do with race? And then Esperanza is looking at it from a decolonial point of view. My girl, you are trying to do anti-racism. I know you suffer from systemic racism as a black woman in this country, but you do realize that you're not helping with the black and brown folk in these other countries. So she's looking at those objects differently, not through the lens of neoliberal whiteness, but more through the lens of decolonial politics. And that's the difference. So I talk about how people apply different meaning to food objects within an ethical food system, and these two characters, as they're trying to talk to Savannah just about coming out of the closet and getting rid of that internalized racism, you can see how they're looking at particular food objects. And then we go back to Eric, where there's a scene where they're at a nightclub, and Eric, he's drinking the $12 chocolate martini, and he's just it doesn't occur to him that maybe that's uncomfortable for Savannah. He's invited her to this club in New York. It's her first time in New York. And she's like, I can't believe you would drink that. And he's like, well, I offered you one. And she's like, it's just obnoxious. Who would spend $12 on a martini? And then Eric turns to Esperanza and asks her, what do you think? And he means, what do you think about the club? And she's like, oh yeah, I think about all of the suffering and slavery that probably went to make your, chocolate martini. And he's like, oh, what are you talking about? She's like, oh, nothing. So it's he thinks he's civilized because he's sitting there drinking this chocolate martini where he's constantly poking at his uncivilized friend who eats at McDonald's or eats, too much coffee. Do you know what I mean? So it's it becomes tense, and he's not the bad one. He really thinks he's being good. He really thinks he's trying to get her to come out the closet and then become a better, more moral human being. But it's not working because the language is not coming from where she's coming from. Does that make sense? Okay. What do I have? Right, great. So I want to read another excerpt from the book. Great, we're out of time. That's right here. Savannah decides to go to the bathroom after one of the performances have been done, and she's completely uncomfortable. I mean, she's been in rural, white, heteronormative New England for all her life, and this is the first time she's gone out to New York City, and she's gone to the village, and she's just like experiencing LGBTQ culture. And she doesn't really know what to do about it, and also her transphobia is coming through because she's met somebody who was labeled as cisgender female when they were born, but then is now identified as a trans man, and his name is Sistah. So she jets to the bathroom, and she's there for a while, and her friend is just like wondering what's up with her. Hey, you've been in there for a while, are you okay? I hear Esperanza 20 minutes later as I sit on the toilet in Casablanca's bathroom. Cesar has just finished his performance, followed by a standing ovation. As soon as he had finished, I had gotten the sudden urge to rush to the bathroom. Savvy? Esperanza continues. I still don't reply. I should, but I just don't feel like it at the moment. I know you're in there because those are your tacky orange Timberlands, she says. I'm okay. Well, hurry up because Cesar's at our table and wants to meet everybody. I got an autographed picture too. Tell him I'll be out in a minute, okay? And she asks me, are you really okay? Sure. Okay, I'm heading back to the table. I'll get a signed picture for you, just in case he runs out, okay? Okay, thanks. About a minute later, I'm washing my hands. I look up as an Asian woman, or maybe she's not a woman, who knows, enters the bathroom. A few years older than me. She gives me a smile and says, Caesar's great, huh? I nod in agreement. She reaches into the inner pocket of her pink corduroy jacket and then pulls out with matching pink scrunchie. Carefully lifting her red highlighted black hair into the air, she ties it back into a ponytail, quickly turns around, and then heads toward the last stall. On her way to the toilet, a thin cigarette falls from her outside coat pocket onto the lavender tiled floor. Why is she smoking? My mind screams furiously. Instead of telling her that it has dropped from out of her pocket, I let her enter the stall. And just to give you background, her mother has emphysema because she had been smoking since she was like 17. Within a second, I'm crushing the cigarette underneath my small foot, twisting and turning my ankle ferociously, smearing the white roll with a hard heel of my rustic orange-colored boot. For at least 10 seconds, I continued to kill it, smashing it as if it had been a diseased cockroach on its way to infest an unsuspecting community, a melanoma helping to feed an already broken world filled with an insurmountable number of broken bodies. When I hear her flush the toilet, I catapult out of the women's bathroom like a vigilante in the night. So it's interesting because like how she's, created this around the object of the cigarette and because of what has happened to her mother. And I link this more into the beginning of the books where there are all of these objects in her mother's apartment that make her very sad because of the memories it brings about how her mother got to where she is. So her mother has been smoking, and her mother's been smoking as a way to deal with the stresses of being a dark-skinned black woman in a colorist, racist, sexist society, growing up poor in the South, and something happened so badly that at the age of 17, she just left up to Connecticut. Took the first bus, leaving the station, and just happened to be going to Connecticut, so she took it. So this book talks about also, what is consumed and how health is compromised when you live in a society in which you're not supposed to be here anyway. And if you have emotional or physical pain from the 400 or 500 years of colonialism, slavery, however systemic racism is existing today, no one's there to help you, no one's there to really talk to you about what you're consuming because of those stresses. So her mother has been smoking like crazy, and now she has emphysema. And she knows that that consumption of that cigarette has been from something that is so horrible she can't talk to her daughter about. Maybe because it's internalized shame from the racism, maybe it's internalized issues, who knows what's going on, which you'll figure out later. But like the importance is that what you see that they're not really talking about how they're consuming certain objects in relation to the suffering that they're both going through. And that you see that Savannah kind of continues that legacy of, overdosing on Dominoes and coffee and all this stuff. Her teeth are like running out of her mouth because she's like each day when she deals with those stresses of poverty, of racism, and she has no one to talk to about it. And then she's kind of going to those comfort foods that are not really comforting over the long run. Does that make sense? So a lot of what this book talks about is, we've got people like Eric who are like, eat like that? I can't believe you eat like that. And he doesn't understand the emotional issues around eating and comfort eating. And he's a character. There are a lot of white people like I meet like him, where they don't actually research beyond the superficial notions of ethical consumption and why certain people actually eat because of trauma. Or you even eat because maybe you just like the taste of the food. It has nothing to do with being civilized, right? Or maybe you eat that way because you live in a food desert. Maybe you eat that way because that was just your culture. So he's not making the connections when he's always pointing, like, why do you eat so much milkshakes when you know you're lactose intolerant? Or why are you eating all those chicken McNuggets? Like, he's not making the connection that her suffering isn't being helped in a healthy way, and that she's kind of going to these products that she even knows are kind of hurting her, but they're also comforting her. So there's that disconnect again. Instead, it's just kind of like he's critiquing her and trying to get her to become a more civilized and moral human being. And he thinks he genuinely thinks he's doing it the right way. And so this is kind of how I engage with these food objects within a neoliberal era. And what I want to do is for my next section, because I don't want to take away too much, but I enjoy novel writing. Like a lot of my work is like, you must be a social science writer and adhere to academic rigor of boring critical theory. Did I say that? But I really enjoy novel writing. I really enjoy, this book took me 12 years to write. It started off as the information that I got out of my 1994 thesis work from Dartmouth College, which was looking at like, I'm a bisexual black woman in the middle of like conservative New England. Wow, this sucks. So how about I like write a dissertation, a thesis about it? Because usually when you do, I was in the critical geography department, when you're an anthropologist or a geographer, you look at the other. You do not look at whiteness as the center. And I'm like, screw this, I'm gonna look at whiteness as the center and how it sucks to be a person of color here and use critical theory. So they wouldn't let me use bell hooks. I had to use Foucault. But I think we could, like, bell hooks is now considered a theorist, so you can use that. But I decided, what would it look like if I turned those findings into a novel? And more importantly, I was interested, rural geographies. And I grew up in an all-white rural Connecticut, and I never really found those experiences in literature. And I'm bisexual, and like, what's going on here? Why can't I find that? So I decided to write that. So that's kind of how I explore writing, whiteness and race and food objects. And I also want to share with you the next thing that I'm doing. It's called the vegan praxis of Black Lives Matter, because I was so I'm going back to Black Rage, which we listened to at the beginning. I was so distraught over Ferguson. And then even more, hanging out in most of the ethical consumption spaces, social media, veganism, animal rights, the mainstream, who did not get it or said really mean things about why black people were rioting. Just really cruel things, like they would die for a fuzzy bunny, but they didn't understand the systemic racism and violence against us. And just the comments people would make. And one of the things that was really striking to me was something that Brian Terry put up. Do you know Brian Terry? He is one of the few black vegan chefs and cookbook authors. And he's written a series of books that don't pathologize soul food like so many mainstream ethical consumption people do, but kind of he reappropriates it and just makes it something beautiful and gorgeous. And then he's like, here are the vegan alternatives if you want it, but he's not like preaching and making people feel bad about eating soul food. And he had written on his Facebook page that, for my animal rights fans, if you actually think that Michael Brown deserved to die because he stole a cigar, then you need to defriend me. Because there were a lot of rhetoric going around, like, what do you expect? He was stealing a cigar. And I was thinking about the cigar as the object of not being civilized. If he were stealing tofu, would that be okay? But there was so much emphasis on that object. And he's not at Whole Foods stealing something, he's at a convenience store, oh my God. So it's just like, it's like he didn't arrive like that. There's this trail behind him that follows, this narrative with the objects he's holding and the black male body that's holding it. And then this very uncompassionate dialogue that's happening amongst mainstream vegans and animal rights people who just didn't get it and saying really horrible things. So Brian Terry, who's African American and who's, spent his whole life being read as a thug, whatever he wants to, right? Like whenever black men are walking around throughout most of America, black man or not, most of us were not white. We have to figure out what all that means. So he posted it. He's like, basically defriend me. So that was frustrating for me, just having to hear that, and lots of the defensiveness when approaching white people with, actually racism is a problem, and Ferguson is like, it's a microcosm of what's been happening for 500 years. I decided to create a conference called the Vegan Praxis of Black Lives Matter. It's an online interactive conference that starts next week. And I've defined veganism not a single way, but literally the root of veganism, which is ahimsa, nonviolence, and harmlessness. So what does that type of praxis look like in terms of Black Lives Matter movement, where we're actually addressing the suffering of humans and non-human animals? That is possible. It's not a distraction if you bring in anti-racism and anti-speciesism together. And I want to go to that slide and share that with you. So, oh great. So that's what it's about. We've got a few minutes left. So that's the poster. So it's called Challenging Neoliberal Whiteness While Building Anti-Racist Solidarity Among Vegans of Color and Allies. I like my very long titles. But what this is going to end up being is we have about 20 speakers, it's going to be recorded, but I'm going to actually turn it, because I like to write, I'm going to turn it into an edited volume at the end, because I think this is going to be really important. Like, you don't have to be vegan, you don't have to be Black, you just have to be interested in not being like silent or in collusion with systemic whiteness. That's what it's for. And we're just using veganism as a platform to discuss Black Lives Matter and how that has to be built into all of the movements if you want to really make systemic change, actual change. And the two questions I'll be asking: what does an ethical consumption look like in the era of Ferguson? Can it be a continuum of the Black Lives Matter movement and resist neoliberal whiteness and systemic racism? What would it look like if we made visible to mainstream vegan USA that the murders of Trayvon Martin, Renisha McBride, Michael Brown, Oscar Grant, and Eric Garner, to name a few, are the collateral damages of neoliberal whiteness? So that's basically my next writing project. We have a lot going on, but that's one of my next ones that I'm really trying to focus on. So I just did Scars. I'm just really interested in how this concept of neoliberal whiteness, for the most part, is operating very, very successfully, but in a very invisible way, at least to the mainstream. So I'm hoping, engagement with a book like Scars, with these characters where I'm compassionate toward all the characters. And you'll later learn about Eric's issues too, how something happened to him in his life, he admits it, he thought his whiteness was going to protect him, because that only happens to Black and brown people. I didn't know this was going to happen to me, so you'll learn about something that happens to them if you read the book. So the point is that even if you're white and you think you're benefiting from it, in the long run, actually you're going to be screwed over too. And Franz Fanon, he's an Algerian psychoanalyst from back in the day, like 60 years ago, he talks about that. It's not just the colonized, it's the colonizer and the colonized who are deeply screwed over and traumatized. There's just different ways, but basically it doesn't really help everyone. So that's my interest in really reading those food objects and understanding wellness and health and food and really understanding that ethical consumption itself, it's not objective at all, especially the mainstream way that it's done. But also, people of color engaging in this, just because they're not white doesn't mean they're not going to buy into some of the ideologies around neoliberal whiteness. So Savannah, the character, she's so into her suffering racism and homophobia, but at the same time, she really still is ignorant about Hershey's cocoa bars until her friend Esperanza until her friend Esperanza moved to America, USA, when they were 8. And she gave Esperanza, she's like, "You're the new girl, I'm going to give her a Hershey bar." And she gives her a Hershey bar, and she cries. Because Esperanza, for her, that food object meant her dad died. Her dad died for that. So there's that ignorance around that. So I'm trying to figure out, no one's perfect in this. So what does it look like when, white people engage in neoliberalism, but also what does it look like when Black people who are struggling through racism may also not know what those objects mean too, in terms of dismantling or not dismantling global oppression. So, and then if you want to follow my work, this is the work I do. This is how you can follow me. Those are my books. And then there's information about the conference. You can click on that link. And if people can't afford tickets to the conference, I'm offering scholarships, and it's interactive. So if you can't attend the whole thing's recorded, and you have access to the recordings and PowerPoints forever. But I tell people I have to charge for it because I don't get paid to do this, but I have to put my kids in childcare to actually do this work. It's taken so much work to put this together, even though it's an interactive conference. And funds also go to kind of just helping with the Sistah Vegan project and doing this. So I'm basically asking my fans to fund the salary to make change. So thank you for listening to me speak. And if you have any questions, let's open it up. But I do warn you, I have to catch a plane really fast, so I have to leave. What time do I have to leave?
In 30 minutes.
In 30 minutes. No pressure. Okay. Thank you.
If people want to just stand or raise hands, and you can
really shout.
be the tooth fairy who grants wishes.
Let me just get some more.
Be shy.
Okay, any hands? Yes? Just scream it out.
Okay, so I feel like a lot of this resonated with me because I've been communicating recently with a lot of people who are interested in organic food, but who also hold a lot of really conservative views that are really kind of dissonant to me. Like, they like organic food a lot, but they're also kind of anti-vaxxers, and they also don't think they see people taking antidepressants and they don't really communicate about that empathetically. They think it's kind of like oh, you're taking antidepressants, and they're not sensitive to mental health issues. And I guess what I was thinking when I heard you talking was is neoliberalism the thing at the bottom that kind of makes all of these dissonant things come together? And can I learn how to talk to these people by reading Grant's Fanon? Is that something?
Okay, so to answer your question, so my center of my work is neoliberal, whiteness, and systemic racism. And then from there, I go. But you could easily replace it with maybe class and poverty is the issue, or maybe capitalism is what's making the problem. So I'm not actually sure if neoliberal whiteness is the way to start. That's just how I start, and then I connect everything because I'm an intersectional theorist. I can't guarantee. I've been doing this for 12 years, and all the education in the world, for some people, they just don't give a crap, and other people they do. But I think there's this myth where if we just educate them, and I don't mean the brown people, the black people, but I mean white people. If we just educate them, then they're going to want to be race traders and dismantle whiteness and racism. So I actually let go of that dream, and I think if people are maybe the people you're talking to, if they're showing an indication that they really want to know what's going on and want to start dismantling it, then it's good to actually provide them the literary resources for that language they can understand. But maybe if they're just instantly critiquing people and already come to their conclusions that people who do this or that are not civilized like me, then I don't really know if all the education in the world can help that. Because it's just because you educate yourself through literature doesn't mean it's going to change the dogmatic way that you think. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what that pivotal piece is in getting people to really want to become change makers and let go of their privileges. I don't know if that's helpful, but I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but it has been my experience, because I foolishly thought, ooh, I went to all of these research one schools, and I have a PhD in it, and I published, so how people are going to listen to me because I have that background. No. I still get the trolls and the hate mail and interesting comments. Even if I respond to them, actually there's a whole list of citations that back up what I'm saying. Go read that, and then you'll see that we're not making out that there's something there. And a lot of, probably 50% of the time, I don't get a positive response that I thought in terms of them changing their consciousness and wanting to do better. But give it a try anyway, don't do it. Yes?
So, listening to you talk about neoliberalism, I'm wondering if intersectionality is almost the issue with the dissonance. So, people see, with the chocolate, for example, people don't necessarily see that exploitation as racial, but they only see it as economic. Or can that muddy the water for understanding the issue?
Well, I actually think it depends what culture you were born and raised in and how you were educated to think about things. So, in America, most people are raised to think in a very individualistic way and very single issue focused. So, I meet a lot of people who have never thought intersection until 30 or 40, and it's just so hard because their brain has been formed that way for so long to do single issue. I was raised in a household and a culture where, for survival, you have to think as intersectional as possible. And my parents didn't get it completely right, but I was taught that it's not it's just racism that's the problem, or classism, but it's the machinery of oppression and all these little gears, classism, racism, capitalism, it keeps the whole machinery going. So I think it's hard for people to grapple the concept of all those little gears keeping that machinery going. Because most people have been raised in a culture where nothing is connected. We're an individualistic culture with single issue and nothing is related. So when I was going to school in college, 20 years ago, the whole concept of interdisciplinary, like that was new in a lot of the Orthodox professors, the way they would teach things. They were not having the whole like double, triple major, interdisciplinary, like you just choose one thing and nothing else is related. And they were hardcore thinking about that. And it was really hard. So I think, like I said, depending on what culture or how you've been raised, there are a lot of people who literally, because their brains, they've been taught that way their whole life. And it's usually, I've discovered it's the more economically, racially privileged people are. Because you have, I think that's the mechanism, if you can teach someone to be single issue, that's how you stay ignorant and keep it going. Especially the more upper middle class population, regardless of race, if you look throughout globally. But to answer your question, I think it's not necessarily a problem, it just depends how you're cultured. And there's ways to get around that. There's a lot of literature by actually a lot of white male allies who come from the language of single issue thinking, and they've written books to actually get white people to start thinking about things intersectionally, but they're using the language of whiteness to get it across. And Chris Krass, he's an author who just wrote the book Collective Liberation, and he's like one of the few white males who got a degree in like critical race feminism, and he's a race trader. He's like using the language he grew up with to teach white people about this in their language. Does that make sense? Yeah, so his name is Chris Krass, and I would definitely check him out. Yes, we'll be right there.
Yeah, so
And if you can just talk as loud as possible, that's awesome.
So I recently become vegan, and I'm a real fan of your work. And I don't know, at least in my experiences, I've kind of made this transition in my life. It's really difficult for me to connect with people about veganism because I feel very alienated from the mainstream vegan movement. Look up on the internet, vegan blogs, and they're exactly what you're talking about. I guess in your experience, how did you find that community of vegans or that are committed to anti-racist, anti-colonialist work, and how did you find those people, or did you create that community for yourself?
Yeah, I didn't actually find it, which is why I started looking at this research work. I was like, okay, what's going on here? And that's what I do. I don't see it, so then I decide to create it and also write about why I don't see it. So in 2005, when I noticed I had never really seen race and gender and class being addressed, I did a call for papers for Sistah Vegan to see, well, how would veganism be practiced by the collectivity of Black women in this country? And then out of that call for papers came my thesis work, which was, it ended up on vegan porn, which has nothing to do with porn, but everything to do with veganism. And it was all the white vegans were like, Sistah? Why does she have a speech impediment? Who cares about race and gender? Whoa! So I was like, there's a major problem of whiteness going on here. So I decided to create the Sistah Vegan project, and I decided to create a community, and I knew there was something there, even though I didn't really see it. So for me, when I don't see it around me and I need it, I create it. And it might take a while. It's I started in 2004 or 2005, and now it feels like I'm finally building momentum, and I feel the results maybe 1 or 2 years ago. I started seeing it, seeing more people reading about it, and people referencing that, I had encountered Sistah Vegan and that way of thinking. So if you don't see it, then start it. It can be lonely, yeah, it can be lonely and frustrating, but you have this a continuum, you have to keep it going. So started, and now, 20 years ago, I didn't have social media and meetups and stuff to make it going. But you've got that, and maybe it's not as cozy as the physical space, but using social media to get your own groups together, just even creating your own Facebook group around the issues that are dear to you, it's great. And you'll see it because it meets virtually, but then everyone goes out to physical spaces to kind of make the change. So I just advise just do that, don't give up. And it can be lonely sometimes, but you saw a niche, you see that there's something needs to be created. Don't wait for someone to do it, you do it. That's my answer. So go for it. Yes, in the back.
Okay, so
And I'm sorry, because I can't hear very well, right? Can you talk as loud as possible, if possible?
I'm not really a really loud speaker, though.
Okay.
You want to stand up?
Yeah, you can stand up.
Okay, sure. So I wanted to ask about, because you said you do anti-colonial work.
Can you say that one more time?
Anti-colonialism work.
Yes?
So I just wanted to know if you have looked at food aid and the whole genre in your work, because I did an internship for WF in Rwanda, and it's traumatic for me just looking at what really gets sent. I don't know if you did work.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I haven't looked at it into too much depth, but I did a little bit of work was I looked at green development and looking at a lot of the communities that, like, I don't care if it's green capitalism, I don't want to use my resources for, like, first world's obsession with green objects and fair trade. So there is a lot of work there where it's critiquing, the development movement, especially if it's been greenwashed and, communities are asking, can you at least, grow fair trade cocoa and fair trade sugar in communities in palm, but communities still don't want to do it. But they're like forced to kind of do it. I kind of talk about that in my dissertation work, but then they're also forced by like neoliberal white guys who are like, you're not being very responsible, and you need to do this so you can give your community running water. Like all this stuff that actually happened because of white colonialism, not because they're not good entrepreneurs, right? So yeah, so I look at that and even start asking people to question green marketing, green labels, and fair trade, because like who at the end is benefiting? Because not everybody wants to live in the capitalist way of thinking. Not everybody wants to commodify their resources. And even if it's green, that's still like a northern, western hemisphere capitalistic approach to resources. So yeah, I do look at that, and it's probably one of the reasons why I never get sponsorships for anything I put together. Because I even I'm just being honest. That's why I have to like do crowdfunding for my own salary, but I try not to, I don't want to stop with that, but I think that's important to look at. And overall development aid has issues, but I really focus on like even the fair trade, green development stuff. Like a lot of communities have benefited from it. There's a lot of narratives, though, and testimonies from communities that don't even want to be part of capitalism, whether it's green or not. So that's your question. Yep. Yes, you in the back wearing the necklace?
I was wondering what your suggestions are for making like local, organic, vegan, healthy food available for all, regardless of like race, class, and gender, like shifting away from making like vegan, organic, like a white-dominated movement, and how it can be more inclusive?
Well, I wouldn't take the colonialistic, like missionary approach to go and like have people do vegan, local, organic stuff. So I would first I would connect with, I would connect with people of color or working class people in the communities who already are interested in it, and have them just do the work within their own communities. Because I would actually be worried to go in and try to create my own system of what I think is local, organic, and vegan for those communities. So I'm usually not interested in doing work for others. I'm more focused on the language that I know as a Black woman, growing up a certain thing, and understanding that language. So I know I'm kind of being vague with my answer, but I'm trying to be careful too, because so when you ask the question, or have people come to you asking it, or is it more that you would like to teach people how to do it, or have people come to ask you about it?
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, if you know things that happened in the past, or if you have thoughts on what would be the best way to work on.
Well, I don't have a concrete plan. With me, I've been listening to what people have already been doing. And I'm focused more on non-white communities and them doing it in a way that doesn't reproduce colonialistic ideologies. So I look at DJ Caveman's work in Denver, where he's doing Afrocentric veganism and not relying on corporations or corporate vegan food, but he's really focused on combating the legacies of slavery and Jim Crow and combating the prison industrial complex. So he brings that all into how he's teaching youths how to garden and grow vegan and eat vegan foods. But I look at him, but I can't really say the thing is there is no, there's no cookie cutter way of doing anything. So that's why you have to understand all those intersections regionally and in terms of time. The racial politics, the class, geography, all this stuff. So yeah, I think it's basically for each small place where it's happening. So I don't have a cookie cutter plan to actually make it happen. And it's pretty vague. Because that's not my work. My work really isn't. You have to know what's going on in there. Then depending on who you are when you go in there, what role you play. Are you the person who comes from particular privileged backgrounds, working with someone who's not in the privileged background? So it gets kind of messy. So you have to be careful. Are you there as an ally? Are you there as somebody who's trying to work with the community without a particular agenda? Do you know what I mean? It's all these different things. So, but I'd say that you have to be careful when you go into any community. If you have any privileges, if I go into a community, if I want to work with transgender identified people, I don't think I should actually go in and start explaining how things should be, because I'm a cisgender identified woman and I have those privileges. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense, am I? Yeah. Okay. So I just don't. Yeah, I just don't I would ask. I would default the question to someone who's maybe a transgender woman who's into veganism and wants to bring that to her community. Then I would maybe I would give her all the critical theory and stuff, social science sources she's looking for, but I wouldn't actually do more. And that's only if she asks. Does that make sense? Yeah, but that's my personal opinion. What I've been seeing, what works and doesn't work. But yeah, but there's no cookie cutter way of doing it. That's what I would actually say. You have to be careful because that's one of the problems with, I think, the way the mainstream is raised and taught in America is that, one thing works for all. Like one diet works for all, one way of living works for all. So you have to be careful with that. And okay, could I have 12 more minutes about? Some more questions?
Right here.
Okay, I said because my ladder slash I can't remember.
Sort of a personal question, but so I really appreciate the links to anti-racist work and anti-colonial work with veganism, but just when you're navigating spaces, and people of color spaces, and just international people spaces, where it is very meat-centric.
Where it's very what?
Where it's very meat-centric. How have you been able to sort of shed the neoliberal whiteness and bourgeois nature of veganism, right? Because I think it's different when you're navigating just general spaces or vegan spaces to shed those associations, because you say, no, my veganism isn't associated with, it's associated with these issues, right? But when you're navigating different spaces, spaces that are centered around meat and people of color, like a family's Thanksgiving. How do you sort of redefine veganism there?
Okay, well that's a good question because a lot of people ask me that, especially when they go back to their communities or cultures where they're not eating the way they used to eat.
Right.
Okay. So for me personally, this is not an answer for everyone, this is just me. My parents, fortunately, they don't really take it personal, and we're different. We don't actually celebrate family national holidays and stuff. But the rare times we do, I remember when I came back home to live with go home with my parents, in Connecticut, this was maybe 6 years ago. And my mom was just so late. She was like, I made you your favorite oatmeal cookies. There's only little egg in them, And I ate them because I just didn't even want to bother with arguing with her, with hurting her feelings. And she's like, but they're free range and they're organic, so the chickens I think they're treated well, and they're our town has, you can see all the people raising chickens in their yards and stuff. And she was she didn't quite get it, but she kind of got it. I'm really interested in animal welfare and animal, not suffering. But I know it's really important for her to make those oatmeal cookies because it's a symbol of me coming home. So I eat them. But I've been very honest with everyone that I have not practiced veganism 100% of the time.
Right.
Especially there were times when I was pregnant and I was traveling, and I'm like, oh my God, I have nothing to eat, and the baby is angry. So I'm like, wait, that has butter in it, so I'm gonna eat it. So I work with what I have, and I try to be compassionate to myself, but also the cultures I come back to. So I haven't actually eaten animals when I visit, my community. I haven't done that because that's a choice I made. But when I travel internationally, we went to Mexico, and I think I was pregnant, but I was pregnant, and I was so hungry, and I'm like, okay, I'm vegan, and the beans, is there anything in the beans? And I started eating the beans, and I was like, where's pig lard in it? I know this is pig lard. And then they're like, yeah, there's pig lard in it. But I didn't know that, I didn't understand that. And even though I tried to translate it to them, and then I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna get upset, I'm not gonna get mean. And they saw that I was pregnant, and they were cool not to put the cheese in it because I said I'm lactose intolerant and in Spanish, so I think I got confused. And and they were trying to help me because we know you're pregnant, we know you want to eat, we're trying to help you, so this is what we have. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it's hard, but I'm trying not to become that, I'm not gonna eat that, at the same time I know that animals have suffered for that. So literally most of the time, 98% of the time, I am able to practice veganism and in a way where I am hoping I'm not offending my family or cultures that I have not been raised around. Right. So I don't want to, just because I'm practicing, I'm not gonna, I cannot be imperialistic or colonialistic when I go somewhere else that is not America. And I want to be careful with that. And my twin brother calls me out all the time. He's like, you're such a snob, or you're being a snob the way you talked about later. And he's my twin, so he can get away with it. But he's reminding me about these things when we try and stuff. So I hope that helps. But, I meet a lot of animal rights vegans who are like, it doesn't matter, I don't care if I hurt your feelings, I will say that, I will do that, and that's their choice, that's how they've chosen it. I'm trying to learn, and maybe next week I'll give you a different answer, but so far that's where I am now with how to deal with the situation.
Thank you.
Are we kind of close?
Yeah, we should probably wrap up.
Okay, so a few more minutes.
Like one more question.
Okay, one more question. Just in case, I just wanted to see if anyone else needs to go, because I know you had gone before. Don't be scared. Because the questions are how I actually make my writing better. Like, you can't hurt my feelings. You know, you can, but yeah, there are no scary questions. So, okay, so you want to ask another question?
Yeah, so I guess because you only have a couple minutes left, can you kind of go into your background about becoming a vegan and that process for you and any complications of that?
Yeah, sure. So let me try to put that into 2 minutes. So I actually, if you really want to know, it's in the intro of my book, Sistah, since I won't have enough time to talk about it, but I was diagnosed with fibroid tumors in 2003 in my uterus, benign, but they suck. And didn't want to go the route of having a hysterectomy or a myectomy. I had run in my family. My mother had issues. My grandmother, I don't know, all the women, it just seemed like, oh, it's hereditary. And then I kind of got frustrated and I didn't do the chemical treatment and I didn't do the surgical treatment. I just kind of let it go. And then thought about it some more, and then my dad was like, well, what do our people do before, like, the medicalization of birthing and reproductive stuff? Because my dad's cool like that, right? And I was like, you're weird, I'm just going to take a leave. And then somehow I was working at this place called Youth Bill, and I was having a really bad day with like cramps, which were exacerbated by fibroid tumors, and I was like underneath my desk, like, oh, just like shaking and like trying to sleep, like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. And my colleague came up and got me, and she's like, oh, you poor thing, what's wrong? I'm like, my cramps. She's like, you have to read Queen Afua. I'm like, what's that? She's like, you have to read it, you have to read it. So I picked up this book called Sacred Woman by Queen Afua, and she's this Black woman who has this awesome take on veganism from an Afrocentric perspective. And it was like, it's dietary veganism, and it's like how to heal your womb. And she's assuming that everyone is a Black woman that she's talking to. From the 400 or 500 years of slavery and like racism and all that stuff that's embedded in our genes, and the anger and the lack of resolution, and that manifests as physical elements like fibroid tumors. Like, that's her theory. And then she's like, here is the Kemetic Egyptian vegan diet that you need to do if you want to shrink those fibroids and put everything around properly. So I did it. And then I was like, okay, well, this is cool. And I became a vegan basically overnight because I was so terrified that I would like have a hysterectomy like my mom did in her early 30s. And then I went to a gynecologist and they like verified, like, wow, whatever you're doing, like your tumors are shrinking, and then they were gone. And I was like, yeah, I just changed my diet to like this, not just a vegan diet, but it was like, it was all like greens and like kale juice and, you know, just holistic. And that's how but then I realized that actually got me to really thinking about, okay, so I was always told when I have killer cramps to just overdose on ibuprofen that could kill my liver. Like, so what else am I doing? What else do I need to decolonize my mind around? And that's how I kind of got into it. And more from the Afrocentric vegan perspective. More from the, okay, so me as a Black woman, how does veganism work? And let's start with how the pain and suffering of colonizing the Black female womb to produce slaves for 400 or 500 years. Let's start with that and see how like decolonial veganism can actually affect that for the better. And that's how I started. And then from there, I started making all these other connections. And now here I am today. Like that's what I did. Good question. Thanks. Because I have a 17-month-old and a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they consume a lot of my time. So it doesn't mean I'm ignoring you, it just means they're being like, mommy, mommy. So, but thank you for inviting me, I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
She's
Huh?
Are you getting food?
I'm gonna go to Prairie Red after this. Yeah.
I might get to.
I want to get takeout because I have to read. Yeah.
You're also thinking about.
I might. Sorry, what?
If anybody wants food week calendars, I have so many.
Maybe we could take one without one.